Hello, I'm Jean-Philippe Courtois. Welcome to another edition of Positive Leadership, the podcast that helps you grow as an individual, a leader, and ultimately as a global citizen. My guest today, Dr. Caroline Leaf, is a renowned cognitive neuroscientist whose groundbreaking research into the intricacies of the brain and how our thoughts impact our well-being has reshaped our understanding of the human mind and mind management. Positive leadership starts with personal development. And Dr. Leaf's teachings on self-awareness and self-improvement can help all of us grow and develop the skills and qualities necessary for successful leadership. It's such an enormous pleasure to have you on the podcast, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Jean-Philippe. It's wonderful to be with you.
So, Caroline, if you don't mind, let's start with your roots. You are born in Zimbabwe, and I think you lived your childhood in South Africa. So can you tell us about your those early years and the values that you learned and that were shaped into you by your parents, and the way you navigated as well transition to the post-apartheid period at the time?
That's a great question. It was a very rich upbringing, and I literally grew up in the apartheid era, and so we were very, very aware as a family and got quite involved. And by the time I was at university, I was very, very keen to start having an influence and a change. So a lot of my early work in South Africa was done through the pre-transition and the post-apartheid era. I did a lot of work in the schools, the education system. I trained a lot of physicians. I worked with a lot of people that had suffered dramatically from what had happened from not only a emotional point of view, mental health, but also from an academic point of view. So I would go into what we would call the township areas, and where they were very abused and so on. And I would go in there and I would go and work with thousands of people at a time, helping them to understand how to manage and process their mental health and how to learn. So I did a lot of work in schools. The schools, the education system was really bad. And so I helped to train teachers to be able to deliver knowledge more effectively. And it was a very enriching time because I'd spend 3 days a week in the most dangerous areas that no white person could go into. And I could go in there, drive in there unharmed and go anywhere because people realized I was coming with a message of hope. It was one of the most enriching times of my life, and I can tell you a few stories that really shaped why I do what I do now.
Please.
And the one was I was actually in one of these environments where I was going to go and work with a whole group of teachers at a school. So the objective was to help teachers, to help students to deal with the emotional trauma, but also to help them improve the academic side of things. And normally there were a couple of hundred people there. This particular day, there were thousands. They were like down there, because by that stage people got to know me. And as we parked and walked through, there was like the Red Sea parted, and it was unreal because following me, I didn't realize why there was such a reaction. But following me, there was one of the most notorious gang leaders, and someone that people just avoided, and no one knew what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going on. I walked into the room, and I started just teaching and doing my thing. But as I walked in, this gentleman walked to the back of the room and stared at me, and I thought, oh my gosh, okay, I'm just going to do what I do. But I hope I'm going to get an escort out of here because this is pretty dangerous. As it turned out, 5 hours later, because I would work with these groups for up to 5 hours. We would talk for 5. They would go all day if I went all day. And towards the end of it, just one of the people had said to one of the teachers said, and leaders said, who would like to thank Dr. Leaf? And this young man, this gangster, this lead, that everyone was terrified of, there were tears pouring out of his eyes. Really? He ran to the front of the room. He held up his pen. He stood next to me and put his arm around me, and he said, now I know what to do with my pen and what to do with my life. Wow. And from there, he transformed. Apparently, he was a major drug leader. He was involved in everything that you shouldn't be involved in. He transformed his life, became a leader in the community, started back to school, got educated, supported it. It just was transformational what he did. Wow. And it was thousands of stories like that. They encouraged me to realize that no matter what you've been through, it's going to you can get through it, you can change, you can transform. Now I couldn't go and fix the politics.
No,
I couldn't go and feed the starving, but what I could do is go and equip people with the understanding of this is how my mind works, this is the impact of life, this is what I can do to help myself get to a point, this is how I can educate myself. And so that's what I spent 25 years doing, and doing research, and that was in South Africa. I'm 40 years into this field now, but that really, Jean-Philippe, that really got me going, and with this whole what I do.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I'm sure you have many more to share. And I've been lucky to go to your beautiful country in South Africa many times in my life. Caroline, it's a wonderful country, society as well, so complex. And of course, you've been going through all that. I may ask you actually the question: are you still in touch with many people there? And given the scope of your work, is this something that you have the desire to go back to maybe one day?
So that's such a great question. So with my global platform, I have a lot of influence still back in South Africa, but I was very involved all through my career, working in the education system, working with physicians, I was on national TV there. So I dedicated my career there to supporting. And when I expanded to the States, it didn't change. They're part of my community still. Yeah. So we actually go back once a year. We're going back now just in May and I'll do three or four conferences there. In to see family. So I don't know if I will ever move back there again, but I do go back, and it's obviously it's in my heart, and that's where my roots are, and that's where my initial research began. So it's a big part of me.
Makes a lot of sense. Any particular memories as well you have, Caroline, of your parents, dad, mom, sometimes grandparents, that kind of shape some of your values early on, and particularly related to your mind, basically, in the way your mind is working and the way you wanted to master it one day?
Well, they were fantastic at encouraging. I'm one of 4 children, encouraging us to really pursue our dreams. And when I showed the direction that I was going to become a neurosurgeon and got into med school and did part med school, but then I realized I don't want to just cut up brains. I actually wanted to understand the mind. So I got into another degree that enabled me to do that. But my parents were very encouraging. So from the beginning, they always, it was just a lot of support they saw the direction going in, and they really opened that door. And there was a lot of open discussion about what was going on. So we were a deep thinking family, and that challenged me. And I'm very grateful for that they opened my mind and really saw the need for me to move and pursue the direction I was going in. Very, very supportive.
Super exciting to see the family supporting you early on. It's not always the case. I know with some vacation calling, some people have to sometimes, move away from their family to accomplish the meanings of their lives. So I think you started your research back in the 80s, working with patients suffering from brain injury and trauma, when it was not yet acknowledged that the mind could alter the brain, and the idea of neuroplasticity was still fairly new at the time. But you quickly came to realization that you wanted to do things differently and to work with patients in a more optimistic and positive framework. And I think one of your early patients was in a coma following an accident, and he decided to do something that was actually not part of the traditional playbook, if I understand. So what did you do and what happened? Can you tell us that story?
Absolutely. So this was in my first year at university, when I went into a degree that actually combined medicine, psychology, communication, pathology, and linguistics and neuroscience. And it was a test. We were a test group. And I say that to just give you the foundation of why I did what I did. Was there was 1,000 people that applied. Only 60 of us ever qualified in this degree, and they stopped the degree because they basically put a 7-year degree into 4 years. So we worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And at the point when I was doing it, I thought, I will tell everyone never to do this. But I'm so glad I did it, because it opened my mind and it gave me the courage to do the research I've done, and helped me see things in a very different way. And one of the lecturers was a neurology lecturer. And as you say, neuroscience was in its birth stages at that stage. We didn't know much about neuroscience. It was very new. So it was much more from a neurological perspective. And our neurology / neuroscience lecturer was telling us about how with people with brain injury, the brain can't change. And in the 80s, that was the philosophy. Up until the 90s, between about the 50s and the 80s, the belief was that the mind was separate from the brain, but that the brain could change. And once the brain was damaged, that's it. So we were having this lecture, and I put my hand up, and I'll never forget this. I put my hand up and I said, "Sir, but how does that happen? How can your brain not change? Because your mind is the thing that's always changing. We're never the same moment to moment. And your mind is using your brain. I mean, you've just said that in the lecture. And so therefore the brain's got to be able to change." And he was quite, 80s, woman, science. It was a challenge. And he quite facetiously said, "Oh, well, then go and do research." So I said, "Okay, well, what area?" And he said, "Well, go and do it in closed head injury, which is traumatic brain injury."
Yes.
And I said, "Absolutely." And he was basically, it was a negative challenge. It was because he was at that stage, there was very little research on traumatic brain injury, and the belief was that once your brain was damaged, that's it. So long story short, I actually, innocent student, didn't quite pick up I picked up the challenge, and I thought, well, let me go prove this. And I started working with traumatic brain injury and work with people, believing that the mind could change the brain. So I thought, if we can learn to stimulate the mind in a very organized and directed way, we've got to the mind is using the brain. The brain can't do anything on its own, so therefore the brain's going to respond. So that was my philosophy, and I developed a system, and I started testing it out and doing research. And one of my patients was a patient that had been in a coma for quite a few weeks. Her and her brother had a terrible car accident. They'd been thrown very far from the car. Her brain damage was very, very bad. And her parents had been told by the neurologists that basically she'd be a vegetable. Now, thank goodness they don't say that to the patients' faces anymore, but that was very often the comment that people would, they didn't want to get the parents' hopes up, which is terrible because hope is a huge part of healing. Anyway, so the parents they ignored that, they didn't give up, and for the first few weeks that she was in hospital, they kept stimulating her. They had people around 24/7. They then just fast forward, they contacted me about a year after her accident. She came out of her coma, which was a miracle. They didn't believe that it would happen. And she started talking and walking again. She was 16 at the time of her accident. So by this time, she was about 17. The parents contacted me when she was 17. She was a very average student before the accident. And at this stage, after her accident, at the age 17, she'd come out of her coma, total miracle. But she was battling to even function at a second grade level. So like a sort of 8-year-old level.
Yes.
And so the parents said, "Will you work with her?" And at this stage, my research was totally experimental. And I said, "Look, I can't guarantee anything. It's experimental.
Of course.
You can try it." So long story short, they worked with me 3 days a week, 8 hours a week. And within 8 months, not only had she caught up with her peer group, which were now in her last year of school, but she actually went ahead of her peer group. She finished school with her peer group. She got better grades than what she did, or her marks, her scores and so on her tests were better than before the accident without brain damage. So she in an 8-month period, she went from a second grade to finishing 12th grade, going on to get a degree, went on to change her life. It's a miracle. When I took her back to the neurologists and the team, they said, "You were lucky." I said, "There's no ways that this is luck. This was utter, pure hard work that this person put in. They used their mind to change their brain." And we saw that at that stage, you didn't have an MRI. We hadn't had MRI, so we would use a CT scan. So we could see the change in the brain and her behavior. And
that's an incredible story, Caroline. Is it what actually triggered deep down into you the calling to do what you do today and what you've done? Because you said at the time you are doing some early days, so you are not necessarily sure about your practice, nor did you define neurocycle steps, I guess, that we'll get to in a few minutes. So was it the key event that actually
definitely
drove you to do more? Yeah.
Definitely. It was a key event because through my 4 years at university, we were very trained in all the clinical side and everything. And I started that research early on. I did some other projects at university that also triggered it, where I worked with children that had been very damaged from various different, brain damage as well, that sort of thing. And I saw major changes, so that it was birthed in my first degree. But then by the time I'd done my master's and PhD, I would say that particular incident was a huge stimulation. And then working in South Africa, seeing that if you just give people ability to use their mind, that changed. So yes, it did stimulate that, and the neurocycle was birthed back in that time period in the late 80s. And the work that I did then in the late 80s, early 90s was some of the first work in neuroplasticity in the world at the time, specifically in my field, showing that if you change your mind, you can change your brain. So yes, that definitely was a trigger.
Yeah. So I think it's not just people who have suffered brain injury or trauma that can use these techniques, isn't it? The skills you teach about mind management and reprogramming the brain can be used by everyone to help them respond to situations, to get basically a healthier mindset. So would you mind starting by sharing some of the basic definition? What's the difference, first, Caroline, between our mind and our brain that you talked about? Because for most people, it looks like the same thing, or it's quite ambiguous. And what do we call consciousness versus non-conscious and the subconscious? But let's start first with the mind and the brain.
Excellent questions. And yes, this is just everything. I'm so glad you mentioned this. Is, even though I started in the world of working with people with traumatic brain injury and learning disabilities and trauma, I very quickly saw, hey, I need this for me. This is actually a life skill. So the application is therapeutic and it's life skill because it's mind, and that's where we can lead directly into the definition of mind versus brain. For years, there was the understanding. For thousands of years, philosophers understood that the mind and the brain were separate, and there's some kind of connection. Then we had the Cartesian time and Descartes and all that sort of thing, where there was the separation was seen, but not a connection. But that kind of, it's extremes. That's always like that. That's how we discover things. We go from one extreme to the next. But if you look at the actual science that we currently have in the 200 years or more or less of the modern sort of scientific age, what we see is a very clear picture between that there is a difference, but that the mind is actually embrained and embodied. And so what I mean by that is think of the physical brain and think of your physical body as very much the physical things. Now, the mind is physical, but it's a different type of physical. We're talking about electromagnetic waves. We're talking about quantum physics. We're talking about gravitational fields, but it exists. And what we know from modern science is that when someone is alive, like us now communicating, people watching, we are able to communicate and connect because of the mind. So your mind is like your life force. It makes your mental side work and it makes your physiological side work. So the fact that your heart's beating right now, the fact that your lungs are working, that is because you're alive with your mind. So your mind drives that neurophysiology, and it also drives the mental aspect of us being able to function. So the brain, if you dead, the brain just disintegrates, as does the body. And also we know that the mind puts life experiences, we with our mind is us. It's our ability to think, to feel, to choose, to respond, to process, to react. It's all of that. We're responding 24/7. During the day we respond to life, and we actually wire that into the brain and the body. So it's not the brain that runs on memory. It's the brain and the body, and it's a feedback loop, but it's also in the mind. Now you've got a sky behind you and everyone can see it. So this is a great analogy you can use to explain mind-brain. So the mind you can see is the sky. It's these interlapping fields and energy fields. And then as the particles of water condense, you form clouds. And clouds constantly change. So this is a great analogy. The sky changes, the clouds change. The sky is your mind, the clouds are your thoughts. And your thoughts, like a cloud is made of lots of droplets of water, a thought is made of lots of bits of memory. And they're constantly changing because we're constantly changing. So that's a great analogy. So you could almost see each of us having our own sky with our own clouds in our mind, and then that is put into the brain as a physical structure and into the body as a physical structure. So the cloud has its own representation in the brain and the body, and then you connect it to everyone else's clouds. So that's skies. So that's one great way of visualizing it.
That's a wonderful analogy. I love it. And it seems to me that, again, the mind comes with this incredible blend of experiences that we've acquired as well during our lives. And then we have to go through the processing of the thoughts, because you talk about the thoughts. It makes me think about this famous quote that I'm sure you've heard so many times. We never know actually who said that. Watch your thoughts before they become your words. Watch your words before they become your action. Watch your action before they become the habits, and then all the way to your destiny. So
exactly,
is it kind of a way to think about the way the mind is working until it gets into the brain and neuroplasticity of the brain?
Absolutely, and the brain and the body. So that's a brilliant explanation, because this conversation, for example, is words that are coming out and visual streams of energy. So auditory sound waves, electromagnetic light waves, that's what are words. We perceiving it as words, but the initial impact is actually those waves, and those waves of the sky processing it and then forming the clouds, and then the sky it takes the clouds and puts that into the brain, and it becomes there's a protein reaction, and you build like a tree-like structure in the brain. And then at exactly the same time, it doesn't happen separately, it's at the same time, you're actually building a little hedge, like in a garden-like structure in every cell of your body. So we have 37 to 100 trillion cells collectively in the brain and the body. And every experience we have all day long is moving from the sky clouds and into the brain as little trees, and into the cells of the body as little hedges. So like our heart cells and our lung cells and all have memory of this conversation, but it's from a slightly different perspective, and it all gets coordinated by the mind. So it's a little bit technical, but
no, I
think people can...
I love it. You know, recently, Carl, I had the opportunity to have a best-selling author, but also a Hindu priest, Dandapani, and a coach as a guest. And we had a fascinating discussion on awareness. He said, where awareness goes, energy flows. And we're just listening to your energy, actually, vibes going through our discussion right now. In his